ambulante. Resonancias. Miles de voces, infinitas resonancias.
Gira de documentales 2022.
17ª edición.
Del 31 de agosto al 9 de octubre. Presencial, en línea y en televisión.
Ciudad de México, Michoacán, Aguascalientes, Chihuahua, Veracruz.
Toda la información en
www.ambulante.org. Ambulante.org.
Muy buenas noches, mi nombre es Blanmi Núñez y soy coordinadora de programación en Ambulante. Muchas gracias por conectarse a esta transmisión. El día de hoy, como parte de nuestras actividades dentro de la gira digital, tendremos un conversatorio llamado Conjurar con las imágenes alrededor del documental Manipulación, sexo-cámara, poder. Para esta actividad tuvimos una colaboración con la Cátedra Bergman y nos acompañan Mara Fortes, programadora de Ambulante, curadora e investigadora, y Nina Menkes, directora del documental.
Muchas gracias, Blanmi. Es un gran honor participar en Ambulante nuevamente y en esta conversación. Y tenemos el gran honor de contar con la presencia de Nina Menkes. Es una realizadora que ha estado en las trincheras del cine independiente norteamericano durante décadas. Entre sus películas está La gran tristeza de Sohara, Amor fantasma, La reina de diamantes. Su trabajo se ha presentado en muchos festivales alrededor del mundo, entre ellos Sundance, el Festival de Berlín. Y bueno, su nueva propuesta, que de alguna manera es bastante diferente a su filmografía, es, como dijo Blanmi, Manipulación, sexo-cámara, poder. Y creo que antes de empezar, mejor vemos un avance de la película y después continuamos con esta conversación. So Nina, it's so great to meet you via Zoom.
Yeah,
But I've followed your work for a long time.
Oh,
and
really?
Yes, I'm a big admirer, and it's great to talk about your new film. In my introduction, I was saying how it's in a way a departure from your other films. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, it's a little bit of a cliche first question, but why did you decide to make this film now at this precise historical moment?
Well, I feel like it was not really me who decided. All of my films up to now, before Brainwashed, were films that sort of came to me from the inside. There was like an interior force that, sort of called out for my attention and said, make me into a film kind of thing. And this movie was in a way, it was like the opposite because it wasn't really my idea at all. I had started teaching when I was very young, just as a way to survive and pay my rent. I never really wanted to be a teacher. I sort of ended up being a teacher. And as part of my classes, when I would show, films, very often I did classes on, gender and sexuality and various topics like that interest me. And I would usually dedicate one day per semester to showing a few film clips, like 10 to 15 film clips, that were like, hey, look at this, look at the way women are shot, look at the way that women are shot differently, and usually the students would be kind of amazed. It seems obvious, but at the same time, it's so normalized that we don't notice it. Um, and then, so that was just really, it was just something that I did, in my classes. I never thought of it as something bigger than that. But when the Harvey Weinstein story broke in the New York Times, October 2017, I thought, I'm just going to write a little piece, a short little essay, just sort of explaining my perspective, which is that, Harvey Weinstein and everything he symbolized, which is this epidemic of, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and employment discrimination against women in the film industry, which so many of us have experienced, and I, of course, also experienced. And this visual language, these laws, the fact that cinema is built on the body of the sexualized woman, and the way that that manifests in shot design. I wrote this short little essay sort of connecting these three dots. And it was published in Filmmaker magazine, and we thought, 50 people will read it and, whatever. But much to our shock, the essay went viral, and it became their most read essay of the entire year, their most popular essay. And then I got invited here and there, and I started giving the talk, outside the classroom, like at Sundance and at Rotterdam, at BFI. And everywhere I went, people came up to me and were like, oh my God, you have to make a film out of it. You have to, everyone has to see this. So it really was not my idea. It was sort of like people came to me and said, please make this into a film. And then that's how the film happened. So it wasn't actually my idea, but I can say that before Harvey Weinstein, this film would never have been financed, and it never would have been shown. If somehow it had been financed, no one would have shown it.
Right, right. I mean, I think when I saw it, what was most shocking to me is that people are shocked. They're still shocked and surprised. Because I think, since Laura Mulvey published that essay, I feel like it's been in the collective consciousness. And I might be wrong, but I'm also convinced that anyone who's been to film school or like done film studies, there's just no way they haven't read it. So in my mind, I thought, okay, well, there's a whole generation of filmmakers that have read the essay, and yet, they're still sort of using the same visual codes in the representation of women, but also, I think I was shocked that people are still surprised that they discover how they're being brainwashed, to use a term.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, because one of the things, when I sort of started, like, when it was like, give your talk at Sundance, give your talk here, I was like, well, isn't it obvious? Like, doesn't everybody know this? Like, and I was told, well, it's obvious to you. And I think that the fact that mostly, obviously not everybody, but mostly the people who like read film criticism and, take the classes in film school where, Laura Mulvey's essay is assigned, and of course many other essays after her. These people very often are not the production students,
Mm-hmm,
So there's sort of a split between the film theory people and the film production people. I don't teach film theory. I'm not a film theorist. I never have been. I teach filmmaking production.
mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that, there's very little connection usually
Mhm.
between those two fields, at least that's my experience. But, I think that, we heard even from, very experienced filmmakers and film programmers like, Tabitha Jackson,
Mhm.
who was, well, yeah, she stepped down now, but, she was the director of Sundance this year.
Mhm.
And she wrote me a personal note saying that, her and the other programmers felt that they saw Brainwashed early in the selection process, and it impacted the way they saw all the other films. Like,
Mhm.
so even people who are super film literate um, have a way of kind of not noticing just because it's so unbelievably normalized. Um,
Mhm.
that it just becomes something that, like, you're kind of aware of it, but you kind of just skip over it, you know.
For sure. I mean, I studied. I was going to be an academic, so I studied film studies. Then I went into a graduate program, but I started working in film festivals and curating, and I guess I also experienced that disconnect between the academic world and and because I think in academia somehow it's very difficult to talk about the immediate present because there's this idea that you need like historical distance from the film. So I felt like I wasn't even connected to the real world of film until I started programming. But um, I think one thing so I don't make films. I mostly just consume them, vast amounts of films. But I guess one of the questions I have that keeps popping into my mind is that I don't know, I no longer know what people mean when they say Hollywood, because that has shifted a lot. It especially has shifted from what Laura Mulvey talked about, which was this very specific period of Hollywood film. Um, so, and and I also I'm appalled at this attachment that we have in film culture to this canon of films that is in a way like a very limited slice of film history. And I think that's changing because people are doing the work of looking, of course, at women's cinema, and you mentioned in the film Alice Guy Blaché, like these women who have been there from the beginning, but also looking at other cinematographies that are, not the someone calls it the axis of evil, like the US, Europe, and um, so I think all this to say that one question I had when I was looking at your film is that um, to what extent is it actually a dominant trope in cinema in general, or just in the cinema that we identify as a mainstream?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, disclaimer, I'm not an expert on, the cinema of the entire world, and I am not an academic. I was primarily looking at American film. We have some examples from world cinema, of course. Um, my focus was really on this thing, as you said, like the masterpieces of world cinema, like Godard
Mm-hmm.
just died, obviously. And, there were thousands of um, articles and Instagram posts and all these tributes to Godard. And I understand that Godard is an important filmmaker. I understand that he was, in some ways, an experimental filmmaker. When we look at the way that he approached women, he was not experimental at all.
Oh.
He is a complete and utter sexist, and the way he photographs women and the way women are positioned in his films is extremely sexist. Now, not one person in any of these articles or posts said one word about this, except for
Mm-hmm.
me, and I got 2 likes on that post. Usually I get like 100 likes. Like, people are afraid.
Yeah.
They're
Mm-hmm.
afraid to criticize Godard. They're afraid to criticize, Martin Scorsese. They're afraid to criticize Quentin Tarantino and Spike Lee and Sofia Coppola. they're afraid to criticize, Teton, which won the main prize. And
Mm-hmm.
when we look at the sexual politics of these films, I mean, I'm not saying that Contempt is a bad film, or that Teton is a bad film, or that Metropolis is a bad film. I happen to adore Metropolis, and nevertheless, when I was doing the research on this movie and looking at, and I revisited that sequence in Metropolis where it's all the eyes and everything, I was just like, oh my God, like I didn't even really remember that sequence. I just like, I kind of loved the whole film. I thought it was genius, you know. So the way that this, the sexualization of the female body has been embedded in the masterpieces of world cinema, um, and people are just still, like they don't really like to talk about it, or they get some people, get very uptight
Mm-hmm.
when you
Mm-hmm.
criticize these masterpieces, you know. So as far as world cinema as a whole, I mean, I don't feel qualified really to comment, but I mean, I can say that, I have seen films from Asia and I have seen films from Africa, and I remember when I was very young, I mean, probably a teenager, seeing it was a famous Cuban film. Uh, I'm not sure which one it was actually, but I remember watching this. It's this sort of a famous. Maybe it was Soy Cuba, or it was Memories of Underdevelopment or something. And I remember as a teenager thinking like, oh, that woman is so beautiful, and like, am I going to be like her? Am I going to be married by the time I'm 25? Because otherwise, uh-oh. And so I mean, I have seen these things, just this is just personal anecdotal, it's not research, but I have seen it in films from, really all over the world. So that doesn't mean that they weren't people all along who went against it,
Mm-hmm.
but those people were far and few between, and we all know, we didn't have the access to means of production,
Mm-hmm. And I think, I mean, I mentioned sort of the beyond Hollywood, whatever Hollywood means, but
Yeah.
because it's in a way it's a bastion of hope, and I think that even because there's so much access to so many more films
Yes.
that before, because only certain prints circulated, like I understand why the canon was so limited of films. So, but now I feel like even students have a much vaster universe of reference for films. Like there's not
Definitely.
this fetishization of the sacred cows of cinema. But I am always shocked. That Sight and Sound magazine does this critics poll of the 10 best films, and they do it like every 10 years since the 1950s. And it's essentially like the same list of films from 1952 to like 2012. And the most radical thing that happens is that Hitchcock beats Orson Welles for one spot.
Right. Right.
It's um,
Exactly.
and that's always it's like the Godard thing. Then this sort of um, inability to think that a critical view of someone's work is not disrespectful. Like it's actually
Right.
just generating different contexts to look at their films. But
Uh-huh.
it is shocking how untouchable those filmmakers are, um, and I'm not sure that they are still that influential or that they're just presumed to be influential. I think it's just kind of.
Well, I think the fact that, not one person mentioned the extreme sexism of Godard's work, 2 days ago or whenever it was that he passed. I didn't read a single person mentioning it. It was just, um, so I think that there's something about, you know, women. It's like how we're 51% of the world, I think, and we're still in this oppressed category that's still so touchy. I mean, it's like, really, like it seems that there's, I mean, is it starting to break down? Yeah, I mean, just the fact that Brainwashed got made and it's showing all around the world. I mean, that, I would say even 5 years ago would not have happened. It wouldn't have happened. No one would have shown it. In fact, when we finished the film, or we actually finished the film like 2 days before Sundance, but a few months before when we were submitting it to Sundance, we were wondering if they're going to take it because, we thought like they might not want to, Robert Redford is in there with Butch Cassidy and, all of these big guys. And we were thrilled that it did get accepted to a lot of big festivals. So that made me feel, hopeful actually, because I think there still is a lot of backlash. There's still a lot of backlash, believe it or not. I mean, you sort of think like, aren't we beyond this, but we're not.
Mhm.
I don't think we are actually.
And I was going to ask you, as someone who's consciously made films, trying to, avoid and subvert those codes, I feel like there, especially in the 80s, there were a lot of women filmmakers who were very directly engaging with ideas of the male gaze, and around the world. I don't think it was just the sort of US independent experimental film context. Do you like, does that still carry weight? Like, do you think that, like, is there still a sense of solidarity between women filmmakers who, like, do you see yourself as part of that kind of movement, or
Um, well, in the abstract, I think in the. I do.
Mhm.
I mean, I remember I had made quite a lot of films before I saw, Chantal Ackerman's John Dielman. And I remember when I saw it and I'm like, "Oh my God, someone else feels the way I feel." But it's certainly, I mean, those films, you had to sort of, I mean, that one obviously has become hugely famous, but I remember in 1996, I was at the Rotterdam Film Festival. Okay, so this is 1996. It's not even early 80s, right? And I was there showing The Bloody Child, and they
Mhm.
had a filmmaker lounge. And the filmmaker lounge where they had like coffee and cakes and stuff, it had these life-size photographs of film directors, 6 feet by 2 feet, black and white, life-size pictures, one after the other, spreading all around the entire walls of the filmmaker lounge. And they were, every single one of them was a man except for Chantal Ackerman. They had Chantal Ackerman and then all of these other male directors. And I remember, I went in there and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so oppressive." And Berenice Reynaud was at the festival, and I was like, "I'm gonna do like a guerrilla action. I'm gonna get this like a red marker and make like a circle with a little arrow, like male, and I'm gonna go around and like, how can they not be aware?" And she said, "Don't do that. You'll be a persona non grata or whatever it's called." And then I got scared and I didn't do it. So I think that was 96. I don't feel like there was a solidarity. I think that the women who sort of managed to make their own work, at least this is my experience,
Mhm, mhm.
were just like barely surviving. I mean, it's certainly there wasn't any um communal feeling that I was aware of. I mean, maybe there was and I wasn't part of it, but I don't think so. I think that there was a feeling of like it's so impossible to even get work made and it's impossible to get work shown.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are these few exceptions, like Chantal Ackerman, Jean Dielman, poked
Mm-hmm.
out, and Agnes Varda poked out, but you know, I mean, my films have been getting attention recently, you know,
Mm-hmm.
much more attention than I got at the time,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I was very determined to sort of keep going, but it was definitely against all odds. So, I mean, if there was a sense, a communal sense, I didn't feel it, which doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean it wasn't there. I can just say that I didn't really feel it. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like it was a great excitement. I mean, I remember when I saw Vagabond in 1986, or when I saw, Jean Dielman, which I saw actually in the 90s. I was stunned and I was happy, but I never like hung out with these people, or had a chance to be part of something that didn't really happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's even shocking, like at that moment in your film where Eliza Hittman talks about, how her film was very successful, but and yet there were no people wanting to talk to her to distribute the film, and um,
And she said, that was 2013.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I think that there's this sort of feeling of scarcity, like there's not enough to go around, and so you're gonna just like whatever you have, you're gonna hold it to yourself, that kind of thing, whereas the guys all kind of help each other.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I don't know.
I also feel like now that there's more pressure
Yeah.
um, for diversity,
Yes. I know.
in film festivals, but it's a little bit. I mean, sometimes I get very cynical because I feel like it just becomes a question of optics, but there's
Yeah.
no actual structural change. It's like um, women directors are hired for directing episodes of TV series, but they're given like no creative
Right.
control. Like
Right.
it's just so you can check the box that
Right.
you have diversity, but it actually becomes a camouflage for non-changing, stagnant, bad labor practices. That's when I get cynical. But
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And the other thing is Maria Geiss, who's one of the co-producers on this film, and she's also an old friend of mine. And I remember when she started it because she came to me. It was around 2012. She had this letter that she wanted me to sign about statistics, in the film industry and stuff. And I signed it right away. And she said, "You're the first one who signed it," because, she went asking a lot of women directors to sign this letter and they wouldn't sign it. And they're afraid to be blacklisted. That was 2012.
wow.
And then she went on to contact the ACLU. I mean, I'm sure you know this, but she really single-handedly took all these statistics over to the ACLU, and then the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, took it to the government, to the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission of the federal government, who saw the illegal sexism that was going on in the industry, and they went into secret settlement negotiations with the studios. Secret. We don't know what happened. The only thing we know is that they were threatened with huge, huge, probably billions of dollars in fines if they didn't start hiring more women. That's why we saw a change. It wasn't because, suddenly people decided to be nice and include a few other people. There was a threat of
Right, when it was a financial
there
threat.
was a financial huge threat, and then
Mhm.
okay, there was the Me Too, there is a consciousness shift, but I agree with you, you know, I mean, I also was I've noted with, how often women directors who have sort of, you know, gotten above the usual extreme struggle level. Not all, but many have come up on the body of the sexualized woman. I mean, I would argue that Titan is built on the body of the sexualized woman, you know.
Mhm.
And I think there's some exciting and interesting aspects to that film, but you know, it is
Mhm.
built on the sexualized body of that woman. So then, you have many women directors, like Hustlers. That was her, I believe that was her first feature. It's about a pole dancer. Why does it have to be about a pole dancer? You know,
Mhm.
they're sort of like, well, as a woman trying to get ahead, I'll use a sexualized body. Well, maybe I can throw some comments around on the sides, but I'm still sort of using that sexualized image in a really central position. And that's, you know, I find that to be kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was that really resonated with me in your film, and also that that you make the connection between the screen and employment conditions, discrimination, harassment, because in Mexico, and this is my experience, but I feel like the Me Too movement alienated a lot of queer people here, especially, and partly it's because the way it became expressed, it would seem that only women are victims and only men are perpetrators, and women are immune to patriarchal attitudes. And I think in Mexico, which is a very macho country, um, it's very frequent that women, and especially in the arts, where women tend to have positions of power, will see other women as threats. Like sometimes the obstacle to younger generations of women are women who kind of have this attitude of, well, it took me, so much effort to get here that I'm not giving any of you shortcuts. And I think it's a big taboo to talk about how patriarchy does not discriminate. Like women have internalized patriarchal attitudes. They reproduce them sometimes in women who make films, as you just described. Um, women are also sexually harassed. There's all these things that are just a taboo subject, despite this great sort of consciousness around sexual harassment. It's like that remains
Yeah,
taboo.
well, it's definitely true. I mean, that was very important to me to include. I mean, I think Bell Hooks says, patriarchy has no gender. It's a, you know, is it usually, men harassing women? Yes, but yeah, I think for me the internalized part is in a way the worst part,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, and speaking of internalized, I thought it was really cool that you have a psychoanalyst in your in your film. Could you talk about that decision to include um,
Yeah,
sort
well,
of
she's
that
actually
perspective?
my own psychoanalyst. um I think that I really wanted to talk about how this affects us personally, because I think that even everyone who's read film criticism and you know um is hip on that. There's usually very little discussion about how deep it goes and how it infiltrates us on the almost DNA level, and it really fucks up your life. Because I think a lot of the writers are, they're kind of strident, and I understand that, and they're like, you know whatever, the idea, we view it as a masquerade, we're viewing through masquerade, and we're doing this, da, 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 da. But I don't hear, or I hadn't heard, um, or read, an account about that inner wounding that comes from it. And actually, you know, all of my own films before Brainwashed are very much about that wound, you know, that wound, because my characters are all in resistance, but they're not sort of happy resistance. You know, it's like the price of the resistance. The price of the resistance is high, and the wound is deep. You know, and this is what some people don't like to look at. You know, like they we had a review in one of the important trades, you know, where the woman said, you know, she dismissed the film as bullshit, and then she said, girls just want to have fun. That was the last line of her review.
Oh,
Girls just want
wow.
to have fun. Yeah. So this you know, it's yeah, we just want to have fun, you know. I just want to be sexy, and I just want guys to like me, and why shouldn't I? It's so superficial, and it's so not the real experience, you know. In fact, you know, with all of this Instagram self-sexualization stuff, you know, where it's sort of like, isn't self-objectification power, you know? How is being an object powerful unless you do this really complicated, um, very complicated, you know, schizophrenic thing in your mind, but it's still not powerful? Because they've actually done some research recently on the effect of self-sexualization on teenagers, and they found that, like, teenage girls who self-sexualize in these kind of Instagrammy ways, you know, make myself into a sexy object, have a higher tolerance for sexual assault, sexual violence, have higher levels of shame, and have higher levels of body insecurity. So, you know, that's one of the key points also of Brainwashed, I feel, is like the price of being the object. You know, it's like, it's nice to just like, oh, but you know, it's so there, oh, this woman's just so beautiful, you know, and isn't it fun to photograph a beautiful woman? I mean, I get it. All the women in my films are beautiful, and I photograph them to look beautiful. You know, but I think that we have to understand the deep price and the deep pain, and that's why I wanted to, you know, include a psychoanalyst.
Yeah, I was thinking too right now when you mentioned the sort of Instagram and like how our public sphere is now social media, and it's become I don't know how to, like, the aesthetics of this public sphere makes it so that it's all about exposure, denunciation, and no introspection. Like we've become a culture of calling out, but not actually looking inward and analyzing like our day to day or like our own values. Um, I guess like one thing when I was watching your film is that, you know, in a way the onus is on the filmmakers, right, to avoid these codes of oppression. So I was thinking, okay, but how to empower audiences, you know, because I don't think, or I'd like to think that we're not all just brainwashed and passive in watching films. And in some ways, you know, even for me, when I see like the Brian De Palma, you know, the Carrie opening shot, and or like Peeping Tom, all these sort of classic examples of the male gaze, I think, well, at least like I'm aware that I'm being made to look a certain way. Whereas I feel like a lot of what we see now, because it's in a way made for fast consumption, there's like no room for thought. You know, it's like you see, and especially in documentaries, it's like you everything you see, you hear, and there's music to tell you how to feel, and there's no space for for experience. And I rewatched your film The Great Sadness of Sahara, and I know you talked briefly about sound in your film, but the sound is so important for creating this kind of immersion into subjectivity. And that's, I feel like people are not people, but a lot of what you see now on streaming, like they forget the power of sound, and the power of sound to challenge the spectator into being a part of the meaning making when experiencing a film.
Yeah. Well, that was, I mean, I agree with you, of course, but the diagram that we did with Raging Bull with the sound, um, that, that, I mean, I don't know that it's, I mean, you're saying like that, like a film like Carrie, you get aware, but I can tell you that a lot of people came to me because I had Carrie in my original talk because it's such a great example, right? Such an obvious example. But you would be amazed how many people came to me and said, Carrie's one of my favorite films, and I just totally forgot about the shower scene. I just blocked it out.
Oh, wow.
And so I think that a lot of times, that whole level, and I think that's what really Brainwash addresses. It's really addressing that, like, the stuff that we sort of block out, as we're sort of moving through our day, or we're moving through our scrolling feed, or we're moving through Carrie, or we're moving through I don't know what, and there's all of this, it's all around us, and we just kind of block it out. We just block it out, and we don't, um we want to block it out because if you really face it, it's kind of overwhelming, and yet it does infiltrate, it infiltrates, and it infiltrates us in a, last night, I'm here in Helsinki, Finland for a screening, and last night we had a screening. It was a great screening. People really were excited about the film, and they even added an extra screening, a fourth screening, because there's such a high demand for people to see it. But last night at the Q&A, this man spoke, and he was saying, like, that he was so moved and realized how he was participating in his life in that kind of looking. And I mean, I started to cry because it was really like, it hurts us as women, but it hurts everybody, when half the world is seen as less than a full-on subject. And this is what the Nazis did to the Jews. Before they massacred the Jews, they had to turn them into non-full-on human subjects. This is very, very important mechanism of oppression. You soften up the victim by turning them into a less than a full-on human subject, and then you pay them less, or you rape them, or you kill them, or you do whatever. But the first step is that they have to be pushed into this non-full-on human subject position. And I think that that's kind of what I was trying to get at in the movie.
And I want to mention a concept just to supplement when you were talking about criticism, but I find too that there's a male critic's gaze that is very present in our culture. And I very often see it with, when films made by women are reviewed, that I have like two pet peeves. One is that they're always discussed by being compared to the great masters of cinema. Either they're like poor imitations, or somehow managed to be illuminated by what came before. And I feel like it only happens with films made by women. and the other is, just the types of, I'm too lazy to actually do a statistical analysis, but it's like films made by women are often described as assured or confident, whereas the words masterful are like reserved for films made by men. And I do think that because that is a mediating factor between filmmakers and audiences, it does really have an impact. It does create another lens through which these films are then looked at. And, sometimes if you compare reviews written by women, reviews written by men about the same film, it's almost like they saw two different films. And it's, I don't know, I feel like that there's obviously a lack of women film critics, still even after this consciousness, the trades, they're still top male film critics. And yeah, anyway, just wanted to
Absolutely.
throw that
But,
out there.
well, I want to throw out the fact that, a couple of the nastiest reviews that we got from Brainwashed were written by women.
Mm-hmm.
So
Like
there's,
the one you just
there's that too.
right, yeah.
There's like, they call. I was talking to my friend here, and she said we call it the pick me girl. The apology. Like, I mean, the fact that a woman in the field of film would attack Brainwashed is kind of mind blowing, isn't it? But it's
And were like all those reviews, were they, and the girls just want to have fun
no,
camp, or was it more like, well, you didn't talk about this, like
yeah, it's like, oh, well, you left out, the history of gay cinema, or you left out this, or whatever, just complain. It's like, well, I mean, I just really was surprised. I mean, I thought that, any woman who's lived in a woman's body for a certain amount of years is going to understand what we're trying to say here, So, this is like, I don't know. I mean, it's just interesting.
Yeah, well, although I think that, the sort of reviews that are frustrated that you didn't include this are like actually better because they're partaking in the conversation and hopefully,
so.
Expanding the universe of the film, and maybe reflective of the fact that so little has been in the, on the screens to talk about that. So I don't know. I know it's hard to see a nasty review as something positive, but I feel like the ones that point out, at least in the direction of having more conversations, are
Yeah. Well, we need more, and I mean, we see this film as a conversation starter. I would love it to be a conversation starter, and there's a limit to what you can do in one single movie. You can't, cover every single aspect of this problem. Obviously, this was focused on gendered shot design and how it impacts our real lives. So.
And now that you've shown the film in different countries, different spaces, like you mentioned this anecdote from the screening last night, but were there other moments where you feel like, that maybe you discovered something about the film, or you thought about it in a different way by experiencing through your audience's eyes?
Well, the truth is that in terms of live audiences that I've been attending, I mean, there's been an incredibly powerful enthusiasm about the film. I mean, if I, and really across countries. I mean, I haven't traveled to a lot of the places, but I've done Zoom, Q&As and, other kind of encounters, kind of all around the world. And the overwhelming response is, I mean, enthusiasm and even sort of a sense of like, thank you for making this film. Like a lot of people who are not film critics or filmmakers, who are like, I always just had this feeling and I didn't have words for it. I didn't have a way to walk out of a film and say, that bugged me because, here are these points. So it seems to, as far as audiences, there's really been an incredible response, I have to say. I'm deluged in, in social media with personal messages like, you know, I want all my friends to see this film. Like, oh, thank you for making it. I've received a lot of gratitude, basically, from a lot of people. Like, thank you for making this film, um, because it seems to be helpful. And I hope it is. But it's certainly not the last word or the final word or the ultimate word or anything like that.
And then I think we're approaching the end of our time, but what's next for you? Like, do you, after the experience of this film, I know it's probably, you're still in the midst of
Yeah.
showing this film, but
Well, I have two feature scripts that are more like kind of really my own, my own inner world, in many ways, sort of more connected to the kind of films, the narrative films that I've made before. And I'm also was asked to develop like a TV series spin-off from Brainwashed. So I've been thinking about that. Yeah, so, but again, I'm up against, the financing nightmare. It's such an expensive art form. And if you want to do something that's beautiful and challenging, that's going to cost more than $5 million, it's hard, especially, in the United States, there's no government support. So then it becomes all about return on investment, and it's very difficult. I'm not sure I will love to make a lot more films.
Yeah, well, it's always shocking to me when, people dump millions of dollars on like a film that has a title with a number on it and a release date, but no script. It's like, it's okay to dump $100 million, but they won't, invest $5 million on something that because I think audiences are bored. Like audiences are bored at the lack of imagination and the lack of novelty and the lack of stories. Like, it's just but as I think someone recently quoted this. It's like, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, which is really depressing but true. It's like there's tons of movies about apocalyptic scenarios, but like thinking beyond capitalism can't.
Yeah, that's so terrible. Oh my God.
Well, is there something I didn't ask or something that you want to add about your film?
Not really. Like I said, this is not sort of. This film is obviously in many ways, a departure for me from in terms of my other films, in that it was made from the beginning. It was really made to reach a wide audience. And I wanted, it's not made for a small group of, really high powered, film theory people. It was really made for audiences all around the world. So I'm excited that it is reaching, people, and that it seems to be having an impact. We'll see what happens, but
for sure, I think, like you said, it's a catalyst for conversations and crossing borders. It's like yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nina, for your film and for sharing your thoughts in this conversation and taking the time, despite being in Finland in crazy jet lag, etc.
Yeah, well, it was great to talk to you. Thank you so much. So please stay in touch.
Yes, for sure. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Muchas gracias nuevamente a Mara Fortes y a Nina Menkes por acompañarnos en esta actividad. Muchísimas gracias a la Cátedra Bergman por esta increíble colaboración y a ustedes, nuestro público, por conectarse a esta transmisión. Si quieren conocer la programación que queda restante en nuestra gira digital y en los estados en los que estaremos presentes, métanse a nuestra página www.ambulante.org. Yo soy Blanmi Núñez, coordinadora de programación. Muy buenas noches.